Prologue. In August 1965, a woman named Rose walked into my grandfather's cafe in Saigon. That much is known. My grandfather would say that's the beginning of this story. My mother would say I should have left it at that. Back then, my mother and grandfather lived in the rooms above the cafe. She was 12, an only child whose own mother had died the year before. In the evenings, my grandfather taught her English from a friend's borrowed textbook. He had a feeling, he used to say, that it was the language of the future. On that day, when an American woman sat down at one of his teak tables, looked around at the blue-trimmed doorways and the ceiling fans that had paddles shaped like ginkgo leaves, he took it as a sign. She asked for coffee or tea, whichever was freshest, and he brought her a cup of French roast with condensed milk and half a baguette, using his most careful pronunciation to ask if she needed any kind of help. It was monsoon season, the part of the year when heat and steam were the same, unrelenting. The traffic of bicycles and mopeds and pedicabs crisscrossed the windows, and the woman seemed glad to be free of it. There weren't many American women in Vietnam, and she didn't seem like a nurse or aid worker. She was old, surprisingly so, hair a silver sweep beneath a straw hat. I don't need help, she said. I need conversation. She was a reporter on assignment for a magazine that wanted her to write about the war in Vietnam from a woman's point of view. She was supposed to spend a month getting a sense of the country, the people, the culture, and distill it all into an article. My grandfather, always interested in other people's stories, sat and talked with her while my mother watched from the kitchen. I have imagined the languorous way Rose might have sat, the way her dress folded around her, making her seem protected somehow, as if she knew the war would not touch her. Rose stopped by the cafe often during the week in Saigon, and though she and my grandfather talked for hours, he remembered little about her history. If Rose revealed her full name, if she spoke about her own mother and father, or anything about the roots of her family, he didn't remember. He recalled instead her lively voice, her many questions about Vietnam. He remembered her largeness, how she always wore a hat. In anticipation of her visits, he reserved pineapple and lychees for her. He offered her delicacies usually eaten on holidays. Sticky rice buns stuffed with sweet sausage, candied ginger snacks, curls of dried coconut. She ate them heartily. He gave her advice about lodgings in Dalat and Hue, and whenever she bade farewell, he helped her cross the street. One day, when Rose complained of a cramp in her leg, he had my mother run out to fetch some balm that Rose later said cured her instantly. "You are lovely," my mother remembered Rose saying. "The loveliest little family." 10 years later, when my mother and grandfather fled Saigon for America, one of the few things they took with them was a small gold pin engraved with a picture of a house that had belonged to Rose. She had dropped it, perhaps, forgotten it, left it sitting on the table where a plate would be. They had kept the pin safe, but Rose never came back. When I was growing up, my grandfather liked to tell these stories about Rose. Once in a while, my mother joined in too. "That big white lady with a purse and a notebook," she would say, "all by herself in Saigon, in a war." Her voice would take on a kind of tenderness, wonder that I rarely heard otherwise. We would usually be packed in the car when they got to remembering like this, but I didn't pay much attention until the time we moved from a town in southern Wisconsin to a town in central Illinois. I was 8 years old and book crazy, could read for stretches in the car without getting sick, while my brother Sam listened to the same music on his Discman over and over. Even then, at age 9, he had the ability to close himself down to everyone around him. That year, my obsession was with the Little House on the Prairie box set my grandfather had given me for my birthday. As we drove towards our new town, I imagined every farm we'd pass was Laura Ingalls Wilder's, and that I could see her, calico-bonneted, walking in wheat. I'd be following her, book to book, from childhood to adulthood, when one Christmas, her new fiancé Almanzo gave her a present. There in a nest of white cotton lay a gold bar pin. On its flat surface was etched a little house, and before it along the bar lay a tiny lake and a spray of grasses and leaves. It sounded just like Rose's pin. The narrow shape and delicate weight I'd known from helping my mother clean her jewelry. Outside, wildflowers along the road blurred together as my mother accelerated to pass a minivan. She was a faster driver than my grandfather, who liked to point out the semis ahead and keep watch for the police cars. "Ong hai," I said, which was what we all called him. "Listen to this." I read the description aloud. "How funny," he said. "Isn't that funny?" "You read too much," my mother said to me. "I say Rose's pin was a gift too," my grandfather went on, "even if by accident. Can't refuse anything like that." My mother said nothing more, but I figured it must have meant the same for her. Why else would they have kept the pin, brought it to America? We drove on, all of us confined together in the old Mercury. We were, if nothing else, accounted for and heading in the same direction. A new restaurant, a new town, a new apartment. My mother and grandfather would take turns behind the wheel, fiddling with the temperature controls. The urn that carried my father's ashes rode up front with them. In the back, Sam and I stared out the windows at the electric wires leading us deeper into the big Midwest that was the only landscape we knew. I decided to pretend that the two pins were the same, that Almanzo's gift to Laura was not just based on a true story, but a real treasure now hidden away in my mother's jewelry box. In books, characters were always keeping secrets. This would be one of mine. I didn't know it would stay that way for years, waiting to be brought out into that light. I went back to my books. My mother gripped the steering wheel, my grandfather searched the radio for weather and news. Sam leaned against his drawers, eyes closed, arms tucked beneath the marl blanket our mother had knitted the previous winter. Outside, the afternoon had long given into clouds. We drove on, together, towards our next new home. Chapter 3. America is mostly made up of small towns, and no matter where you go, mountains or seaside or flatness, you will always find, just off an interstate or county road or tucked into a strip mall on a commercial pass, a worn-out looking Chinese buffet. It might be called the Golden Panda, or New China, or New Golden Panda Buffet, or just plain Asia Buffet, Oriental Buffet if it's a real backwoods area. The words spelled out in kung fu, chop suey font, or depending on the economics of the neighborhood, utilitarian block lettering, sans serif. Some of the buildings will have a pagoda look to them, with faux clay tiles and gold trim. Others will be more to the point. Cement, windowless, cheap real estate. They will have rutted lots, signs that say more parking in rear. And when you open the door, an electronic two-tone bell will announce your arrival. Inside, the lighting will be dimmed, concealing the fine layers of grease that have settled into the surfaces, settling even now into your hair, your clothes, your skin. But don't think about that. Look instead at all the Asian stuff. Dusty red lanterns, pictures of dragons and fishermen, paper placemats printed with the signs of the Chinese zodiac. Everywhere you look, there will be plastic, vinyl, PVC. The plants in the corners, the seat of each chair, the amber-colored cups at the water dispensers, and at the cash register, a little altruistic tray that tell you to go ahead, take a penny, leave a penny. But remember what it is you came for, the gold, the crux, the mother lode, gleaming rows of inset chafing dishes where steam rises to meet the plastic roofs known as sneeze guards. The setup will tell you about the restaurant's ambition. Are there 2 buffets, lined up like parallel stalwarts, dependable, traditional even? Or do they form one line as in a middle school cafeteria? Are they perhaps angled, even perpendicular, in a nod to the newer, avant-garde style of enterprise? Are the buffets close to the kitchen, which is easier for the workers but more of a trek for some of the diners? Or do they take the center of the room, proud to claim the spotlight? You may agree that one of the best things about a buffet is no waiting. The plates and bowls are always ready, and someone will always take away the dirty ones. As experienced diners know, time can work for you at the buffet. Play it right, and the span between walking in the door and biting into an egg roll is no more than 2 minutes. But what is your methodology? Do you move from left to right, appetizers to dessert? Do you pace yourself, dish by dish, or do you crowd as much as you can into each helping? How do you gauge your hunger to your greed? How do you figure the difference between eating and consuming? You might choose to begin at the tureens of soup, wonton, hot and sour, yellow egg drop, thickened into goo. From there, you might be distracted by the mounds of fried rice shining with oil, white rice available only upon request. Sesame balls and steamed buns, plenty of carbs for the rookies who fill up on them first. There will be piles of those cabbage-filled egg rolls, their skins turning obstinate under the heat lamps. The whole array of fried will be impressive. Fried wonton strips, fried shrimp, fried chicken wings, fried crab puffs, fried dumplings, and the essential crab rangoon. All that happens even before the entrees. Lo mein, spare ribs, Mongolian beef, sweet and sour pork, sweet and sour chicken, cashew chicken, almond chicken, sesame chicken, and of course the famous deep-fried nubs named after the mysterious General Zhao. It's all gloriously American, brought in by food distributors, defrosted, reheated, refried, doused with the sweet, sweet, viscous sauces that arrive in giant plastic jars or frozen blocks, almost arbitrarily labeled Kung Pao, garlic, and Szechuan. This is not to say that all buffets are alike. No, each has its own personality, its own special offerings, like fried corn on the cob or Shanghai noodle burritos. Some buffets take a pan-Asian approach, with California rolls, pad thai, chewy parcels of bulgogi. Some rely on incentives, like all-you-can-eat king crab legs for an additional $4. Others go for the broad ethnic variety, adding spaghetti with marinara, Swedish meatballs, quesadillas, hot dogs, chicken fingers, tater tots, and a bin of mixed romaine with ranch Italian and Thousand Island dressings parked next to the dessert puddings. Dessert, of course, is a crucial part of any buffet. You need the soft-serve ice cream with a fixins bar of chocolate and caramel and sprinkles. You need your grocery store cookies, cannoli, brownies, orange jelly rolls, slices of sheet cake, and red-dyed cherry pie. You have to have your syrup-soaked fruit cups, your red and lime Jell-O, and your Jell-O mixed with Cool Whip. All this and so much more for just $5.99 at lunch and $8.99 at dinner, not including tax and drinks. Most customers don't leave tips, maybe $1 or some change, though they do make as many trips as possible to the chafing dishes, hauling food like it's a sport. The same people who tell their children to eat every bite on their plates at home will heap on the sweet and sour, take a couple of bites, and move on to a fresh plate. When presented with a buffet, a kind of determination tends to come over people. Maybe you know what I mean. Maybe you start to feel, as I have, like the food is free, that the whole of it is yours, that you ought to claim more and more even if you don't eat it. You wonder if you can sneak some leftovers home. You're paying for this after all. You find yourself getting caught up in the allure, the expanse, dizzied by the promise, the challenge of all you can eat, all you can get, all you can demand. In your haste, you might spill food on the tables, grab at the serving spoons and drop them wherever you like. Doesn't matter. Eat now, forget tomorrow. Ask for more fried shrimp, more white meat chicken. You must exercise your right for endless refills, bottomless cups of soda pop. You must do whatever it takes to get your money's worth. When you see these restaurants, especially in the many areas of the United States referred to as the flyover country, when you're driving past them, glad to be heading somewhere else, somewhere better no doubt, you may feel sadness and amazement and pity, and you may wonder, how did that restaurant happen? Are actual Asian people running it? How did those poor souls end up here in the middle of nowhere? My family was one of those you might have wondered about. In 1989, if you had driven past the Golden Dragon restaurant in LaPorte, Indiana, and perhaps decided to stop in and check out the place, why not? You're hungry, you might risk it. You would have seen my parents replenishing the buffet, unloading ribs and wings, wiping the tables, stacking plates. Interchangeably waiters, busboys, cooks, my parents ran the place in tandem. They weren't Chinese, and neither had any training as a cook. But it didn't matter because the customers didn't know the difference. I was 5 years old then and had no idea what it meant to run a restaurant, to be one of the few Asian families within a wide radius. In a year, my father would be dead, and not long after that, the rest of us would be in a different small town in a different Midwestern state. But the Golden Dragon was the first buffet I remembered. We had moved to LaPorte because my parents had heard of a family with jobs available at their restaurant. That was how it worked in the community, relying on friends of friends who were trusted, even if unknown, simply for being Vietnamese. The town was about 20 miles away from a nuclear power plant in Michigan City, where we had gone once to see that Great Lake. Sam and I were fascinated by the cooling towers and by the fact that you could swim and lie on the beach within view of those thick hourglasses, the steam that lifted away from them in slow motion. Ever after, I couldn't help associating LaPorte with those towers. Vaguely menacing, yet something people seem to take for granted. Sam and I used to go to the Golden Dragon with our grandfather for late dinner. Late because we could eat the dregs of the buffet for nothing, and with no customers around, the restaurant felt like our own playhouse. We crawled under the tables, pretending to be on submarines, secret missions. We crammed our mouths with wonton strips and drank as much Sprite as we wanted. If any crab rangoons were left, we fought over them. Our grandfather shook his head at the very idea, sickening to him, of cream cheese flavored with fake crab, stuffed in wonton and deep fried. Sam and I knew we were American because we loved those things the most. The oily crisp giving way to the salty ooze. Ong Hai would wrap up the chicken or beef dishes to take home, and my mother and father would scrub down the stainless steel bats, preparing for the next day. At the time, I thought we owned the place, that it was fancy, ours, and that by right of daughterhood, I could think of myself as some kind of golden dragon princess. It took me until middle school, long after we left LaPorte, to feel the abjection of my family's livelihood, to understand what did and did not belong to me. By then I had started bussing tables and saw that buffets in other towns and states followed the same structure, the same skewed ratio of fried to non-fried. A lot of the customers assumed we didn't speak English, and therefore we were invisible to them. If white people thought I couldn't understand them, what might they say? As it turned out, people liked making jokes about eating dogs. They said no matter how much they ate, they were going to get hungry again in an hour, a line I never really got. Sometimes they took on exaggerated Asian accents right in front of me, like Mickey Rooney doing yellowface in Breakfast at Tiffany's. Paikala was a common phrase. Ah, grasshopper was another. Bonsai! And the yodeled, cringing cry of Long Duck Gong from 16 Candles, the thing I could never forgive John Hughes for. Oh, sexy girlfriend! It was all a joke, of course. Can't you take a joke? It's funny. Why get offended? Why be so sensitive? Even if I was tempted to say something, fling back some kind of retort, if I could come up with something to say, I never would. Always my reaction was to retreat, conceal the humiliation of my race. That was what Asian people were supposed to do, wasn't it? Stay nice, slip from view. But then there were times people would want me to talk. They would ask me what I was. What are you? Where are you from? Answering America or here was not sufficient. It didn't matter that I had been born in LaPorte. They wanted to know where I was really from, what I really was. They would take guesses. They might ask if I knew such and such Vietnamese person in a different city. Was I related to them? Once in a while, someone would try out a few words in mangled Chinese or Vietnamese, and I would just nod and try to smile. Occasionally, people would mention that their father or uncle had fought in Vietnam War. And a few times, people asked what right I had to be in this country. That was when I started realizing that not everyone knew the basic history of the war, that there were those who viewed all of Vietnam as the enemy, the Charlie of so many fucked up movies. In retrospect, most of the customers were forgettably normal, predictable, easy. A number of vets frequented the buffets, and they were always kind, prone to leaving tips, lingering to chat with my grandfather. But of course, I remember the rough patrons most. I let their words linger, reiterate themselves in so many moments of reflection. I often wondered how my mother, with that proud lift of her chin, had been able to stand it. But she was pragmatic. If the money was good and the money was steady, what else mattered? Didn't make any difference, she said once, if all the customers were fools, so as long as they paid. My grandfather seemed to agree. He made friends with the regulars, told them to call him Ong Hai. Mr. Hai, his first name. Soon, Sam, lingering on the edges of the restaurant, watching the rest of us toil, started calling him that too. But Ong Hai even took mockery in stride. He said you couldn't blame people for still learning, even if some of them were pretty slow at it. He traded jokes with customers, talked weather and snow and lake effect, smiled, no matter what. When people complimented him on his English, he thanked them with sincerity. Ong Hai became the name he answered to at work and at home. This is good business, is what he said. This is our American way.